The people demand and deserve an active government on their side. But they don't want a government that wastes money, a government that costs more and does less. They voted for change. They wanted a literal revolution in the way government operates, and now you and I must deliver. Yesterday, I announced the reorganization of the White House staff that will reduce our staff by 25% and cut costs by $10 million per year. Today, I have called you, the members of the Cabinet, together to take the next step, to begin the overhaul of government as a whole. The steps we're taking today will save the American taxpayers $9 billion. They won't be easy, but they will make a difference. We have an obligation and an opportunity to change the way government works and to show that government can do more with less. Our government needs change. For the last dozen years, I've heard our leaders call loudly for less government while giving people more government, and perhaps more importantly, while giving almost no attention to better or different government, to new ways in which partnerships could be made with people in the private sector and in the state and local governments. First, I am ordering a reduction of the federal bureaucracy by at least 100,000 positions over the next 4 years. At least 10% of these cuts must come from senior management. The cuts can come from attrition. I see no need for layoffs. These cuts will make our government more efficient and more effective. The government is full of dedicated people whose hard work is being choked off by our own bureaucracy. Second, I'm ordering each federal department and agency to reduce its administrative as opposed to its program cost by 12% over the next 4 years. With better planning and innovation, we can make better use of the money we already have. In many agencies, overhead is too high, red tape is too thick, and the day-to-day operations of the agencies have not been re-examined in a very long time. I believe government can both care about people and be careful with their money. Third, I am today ordering the elimination of hundreds of unproductive and duplicative advisory commissions that have spread across this government like kudzu. I'm asking the Office of Management and Budget to eliminate at least 1/3 of the 700 advisory boards and commissions that were not created by Congress. From now on, agencies and departments will not be allowed to create new commissions without permissions from OMB. We simply cannot allow the federal bureaucracy to beget more bureaucracy. Change must begin at the top. That's why I cut the White House staff by 25% and ordered federal agencies to cut billions of dollars in administrative costs and to trim 100,000 federal positions by attrition. And in my budget, there'll be more than 150 specific cuts in government spending programs. The government is the problem here. It causes inflation. It causes middle-class people to have trouble. What we need is a very restricted role for government. We have run a horrendous government deficit. The deficit is now 4 times as big as it was in 1980. We have seen spending go up in areas that the government would have to move to control, mostly health care, and then interest on the debt, because when the deficit gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you spend more money on the debt. So we have reduced investment, increased the debt, moved money upward so that there's been much more inequality of income distribution. It means that we must reduce the government's debt. Why? Why? Because if the debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger, 2 bad things happen. Bad thing number 1 is that Congress spends more of your tax money every year paying interest on the debt than investing in your future. It's now up to 15 cents on the dollar. If we do not change present spending patterns, when you hear people oppose the program I outlined, ask them what the cost of the status quo is. If we behave for 4 years, if we behave for 4 more years like we have for the last 12, here's what will happen. By the end of the decade, the deficit will be $650 billion a year, and we'll be spending about 22 cents of every one of your tax dollars just paying interest on the debt. We'll be spending by then, because of the growth of health care costs, about
65 cents of your tax dollars on entitlements. And being in Congress will be a matter of how you spend 5 or 6 cents on every dollar. The rest of it will just be rubber stamped. You can just have a computer instead of Congress. I know what you're thinking. Please don't say that. It's squeezing the life out of the money you're giving up in taxes. Second reason, even more important, is the more money the government borrows every year, the less money there is for people to borrow in the private sector, and the higher the cost of the money is. Just since the election, since we made it clear that there was going to be a determined effort to lower the deficit, interest rates long-term have dropped considerably. I'll come back to this in a moment. But if you think about it, this year, if we pass this budget, everybody in America who borrows long-term to finance a business, to finance a car, to finance a home, to finance credit card purchases, everybody that has access to variable interest rates will have those interest rates go down, and in my judgment, virtually everybody who has credit will save more money in lower interest costs than they will pay in higher taxes. Now that's very, very important. Now, how are we going to do this? First thing we have to do, and I mean the first, is to cut inessential government spending. I've been president 4 weeks. And I've been president 4 weeks, and I've found things that I wouldn't have believed. The White House, when I became president, was running on Jimmy Carter's telephone system and Lyndon Johnson's switchboard. In this high technology era, with a procurement system that would have broken Einstein's brain. There are a lot of things that needed to be changed in the federal government, and there still are. But in 4 weeks, we have cut the White House staff by 25% starting at the beginning of the next fiscal year and reorganized the White House so it will work more efficiently, not just cut, but serve better. We have authorized in this budget administrative cuts in every government department totaling 14% over the next 4 years for a savings of $9 billion. And there have been 150 specific cuts in government programs, including programs that help a lot of good people, but that I don't think we can afford at the present level anymore. All these things have constituencies. But I can tell you, we are going to have to prove that we can cut things. That when Roosevelt talked about bold, persistent experimentation, you know what an experiment is in science. It is trying out a new thesis. If it works, you incorporate it, you build on it, you go on to the next experiment. If it doesn't work, you quit. Government has a one-way experiment, right? We're very good at starting things and absolutely terrible at stopping them.
If you want to know why government doesn't work, look behind you. The answer is at least partly on those forklifts. Those forklifts hold copies of budget rules, procurement rules, and the personnel code. The personnel code alone weighs in at over 1,000 pounds. That code and the regulations stacked up there no longer help government work. They hurt it. They hurt it badly. And we recommend getting rid of it. And that's one reason I'm so pleased today to give you the report of our National Performance Review. The report contains hundreds of suggestions just like that one, totaling $108 billion in savings over the next 5 years if these recommendations are enacted. It is inspired by your vision of a government that works for people, cleared of useless bureaucracy and freed of red tape and senseless rules. This report tells us how to cut waste, cut red tape, streamline the bureaucracy, change procurement rules, change the personnel rules, and create a government that works better and costs less. Let me tell you a little bit about what we found. First, some bad news. We found that government really does not work very well in ways that will take a long time to fix. We've accomplished a lot in the last 6 months, but we still have a government that writes 10 pages of regulations on how to make an ashtray. We have a government that for the last 12 years has managed to spend $4 for every $3 that it takes in. That personnel code on those truck lift pallets behind us, we hire 40,000 people just to enforce that personnel code. And let's not forget, much of what is wrong with government doesn't lend itself to amusing anecdotes. It's the kind of unnecessary red tape that means somebody who calls the IRS with a question gets put on hold forever, or a small business owner has to spend hours and hours filling out a completely useless form, or a division head buys equipment he doesn't need because it's the end of the budget year. It's old-fashioned, outdated government. It's government using a quill pen in the age of word perfect. Cut wasteful spending. We can get rid of those outdated subsidies, not just for mohair sweaters, but in every area. We'll consolidate departments. We'll get rid of duplicate departments. We'll allow competition to bring about better service at lower cost. Second, it tells us how to streamline the bureaucracy, and we can cut it dramatically. We can downsize government by 12%, reducing the bureaucracy by 252,000 positions. We can also change the structure of government by getting rid of the layer upon layer of management that prevents us from getting things done for the American people. Third, it tells us how to improve customer service. We can set customer service standards equal to the best in business. We can require agencies to survey customer satisfaction and measure performance based on customer satisfaction. Fourth, it tells us how to overhaul federal procurement. We can simplify it, give managers buying authority, streamline the process so they can buy more like businesses buy, and save money in the process. And finally, it tells us how to overhaul the personnel system. We recommend scrapping that 10,000-page personnel code by next September, replacing it with guiding principles. We want managers to be able to hire and to fire, to promote, to reassign, and to reward excellence. If we make these changes, we can create a government that works better and costs less. We can treat taxpayers like customers. We can provide a quality product. We can hold government employees accountable and reward excellence. The National Performance Review is about change. It will get us moving from red tape to results. It will result in a new customer service contract with the American people, one that demonstrates to taxpayers that their tax dollars will be treated with respect for the hard work that earned them. For too long, government has been an obstacle to change. But if government is powerful enough to block change, then it is powerful enough to bring change.
The Reinventing Government, or RIGO, report aims to save $108 billion over 5 years through eliminating scores of wasteful programs and regulations. Among the 800 recommendations, eliminating 12% of the federal workforce, merging some government agencies like the FBI, the DEA, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, closing hundreds of government offices outside Washington.
Today, we're releasing a formal status report on the first year of the National Performance Review. Here's the report in CD-ROM version. It's also available on the internet, and for some of us, there is also a book.
Since I became president, the size of the federal workforce has been reduced by 71,000 positions. In 3 years, we'll have the smallest federal workforce since President Kennedy was here, to go with 3 years of deficit reduction in a row for the first time since President Truman was here. I'm proud to announce some more good news today. At the General Services Administration, Administrator Johnson saved $1.2 billion by carefully reviewing construction projects that had been approved and not yet built. In other words, buildings we really didn't need. And just today, the GSA is announcing it saved $23 million
simply by managing the government's motor pools more efficiently. Today, the Secretary of Defense set a goal to cut in half the time it takes to complete internal business processes from hiring workers to building new weapon systems. This is very important. Senator Glenn has worked for years on procurement reform. If we are going to maintain the national security at a time when we have to impose budget discipline, we must find ways to make these dollars go further. We can't simply abandon our technological lead, our readiness, our preparedness, all the things that have been so carefully built up over the last 16 or 17 years. At the Office of Management and Budget, Director-designate Rivlin tells me the federal government will offer buyouts to another 40,000 employees at the beginning of the new fiscal year next month. I am more convinced now than ever that we have to keep doing this, that we have to make this reinventing government a permanent process, and that there are serious structural issues which still have to be addressed. Washington needs to work for ordinary middle-class Americans, and in order to do that, we have got to find a way to open this process up so that the public interest can always overwhelm particular interest in matters of great importance. We have worked very hard to cut government spending and to bring the deficit under control. The government debt increased by 4 times during the 12 years before I took office. I want to remind you what that burden means. It means that this April, when people make out their checks to the government, 28 cents of every dollar of federal income tax will be necessary to pay interest on the debt accumulated between 1981 and the day I was inaugurated. It is our responsibility to turn that around, and we have been working to fulfill it. We have already passed budgets that cut the deficit by $700 billion, eliminate 100 government programs, and cut over 300 others. A major part of this endeavor has been the Reinventing Government initiative led by the Vice President. I have worked hard to reduce and to redirect government for many years, since my early days as governor of my state, when we were one of the first states in the country to adopt a statewide total quality management program, which resulted in cutting regulation and paperwork, eliminating agencies and departments and programs that were unnecessary. Now we are cutting things that can be cut. We propose to stop doing things that government doesn't do very well and that don't need to be done by government. And we believe we should increase our efforts where government can make a real positive difference in the lives of ordinary Americans. We have to change yesterday's government and make it work for the America of today and tomorrow. In the last 2 years, we have made a good beginning. We have begun to shrink the federal government's bureaucracy to its smallest size in 30 years. The workforce of the federal government is already almost 100,000 below where it was on the day we were inaugurated. We are on the way to a reduction of 272,000 positions, cuts that are freeing up money to invest in our people. For example, every dollar that goes to fund the crime bill, which is a direct transfer of investment to our local communities at the grassroots level, comes from the cuts we are making. Our administration has just completed a review in which we have identified $24 billion in cuts in bureaucracy, red tape, and outmoded programs to help to do this. And we are committed to continuing the freeze on discretionary spending, which will save another $52 billion in the next 5-year budget cycle. We will do even more to shrink yesterday's government. I have called on the Vice President to review every single government program and department for further possible reductions. He's also going to review the federal regulatory process, and we have spent a good deal of time on that already, so that we can get better results for the public with less interference in their lives.
Put customers first, cut red tape, delegate authority, and cut back to basics. That is how we will decide what government should stop doing. We'll put customers first in this review by getting them involved at every stage of the process and listening carefully to their opinions and ideas. We will stop producing red tape and start paying more attention to results than we do to processes. And as you have asked, Mr. President, we're going to also see about reinventing the government's approach to regulatory issues and the regulatory process. That's well underway also. We will stop making so many decisions in Washington that would be better made by state government, local government, or individual citizens, and we will replace Washington interference with local opportunity. By next week, there will have been 98,000 positions eliminated. We were previously committed before today's announcements to an additional 175,000 for a total of 273,000. There will the FTE savings associated with today's announcements will be over and above or under the limits already announced, but the specifics will flow from the detailed plans in each agency and department.
Mr. Vice President, could you spell out the $52 billion freeze in discretionary spending in 1999 and 2000? Where will those cuts be made specifically? Which departments will be frozen?
That is closely related to the President's other announcement today, which is that he is directing me to look at every single department and agency and program and take the same approach that we have been taking to reinvent the entire process and to eliminate programs and commissions, agencies that are not needed. The $52 million that comes from the freeze on domestic spending is, in essence, the bogey that we will have to hit for the remainder of the reinvention process. Now, there are other related efforts at cutting and saving that will also enable us to hit that 52 bogey.
How did you come up?
I ran for president promising to put the American economy back on track and to cut the federal deficit in half. In 1993, without a single Republican vote, the Democratic Congress adopted our deficit reduction plan. It was a plan that shrunk the deficit while investing in our people, their education, and the technological future of America. We took firm steps toward a balanced budget, but we did it in a way that honors our values of responsibility and opportunity, work and family, a strong American community, and a strong America around the world. We did deficit reduction consistent with our values, and it was very good economic policy. Today, America is on the move. The economy is growing. The American people have produced 7.5 million new jobs, 2.5 million new homeowners, over 2 million new small businesses, and the lowest combined rates of unemployment and inflation in 25 years. And I am pleased to announce today that the deficit in fiscal year 95 is $164 billion, cut almost in half in just 3 years. The deficit was projected to be $302 billion, as you can see here, before our plan was adopted. It was $290 billion in 1992. We began immediately to bring it down. It came down to 255 to 203, now to 164 in these 3 years. This is the first time since Harry Truman was president that the deficit has actually dropped 3 years in a row. The plan has worked better than we projected that it would, and as the chart shows, the deficit reduction is for real. Now it is time to finish this job, to take that red line down to zero. We must balance the budget to take the burden of debt off of our children and to free up more funds for investing in our future. The most important thing about this, folks, is that America is moving in the right direction. The deficit is coming down. The jobs are going up. The crime rate is down. The welfare rolls are down. The food stamp rolls are down. Defaults in child support are down. The poverty rate is down. The teen pregnancy rate is down. Small businesses are up. Business failures are down. We are moving in the right direction. We know what strategy works. The strategy that works is to reduce the deficit and invest in people, invest in technology, and grow the economy. Why would we abandon a proven strategy that works and that will take us all the way to a balanced budget? Look, we have proven what works. Cut and invest works. Reduce the deficit but invest in our future works. It's quite conceivable that if my budget were adopted, just as I propose it, that economic growth could take the deficit down even more quickly. But I didn't estimate that is. My budget is premised on the economy growing at about the same rate it has for the last 25 years, with the profits of our business enterprises at about the same level. If the same thing happens in the next 3 to 5 years as happened in the last 3, we would have quicker growth and a quicker resolution of this. But that's why I think we should not be pessimistic about the future. But if the more we can get this deficit down, the lower interest rates will be for people in the private sector. That means they'll borrow more money, they'll build more houses, they'll have more home mortgages, they'll invest in more plant and equipment, the economy will grow quicker. Also, the lower our interest payments on our own debt will be, which means we'll have more funds to invest in education, healthcare, and the environment. The annual deficit and the total national debt had quadrupled in the 12 years before I took office. In 2 years, we have turned that around. In 1993, we passed the single largest deficit reduction package in American history, reducing the deficit over 5 years by $505 billion. When you take into account improved performance of the economy and reduced interest rates in 1993, the deficit reduction will exceed $600 billion over this 5-year period. We did it by returning something to Washington that had been missing for too long: real discipline and honest numbers in the budgeting process. We did it, unfortunately, last year and the year before without any votes from members of the other party. And I hope now we will be working together to keep the deficit under control and keep the economic growth going. We cut the federal government by more than 100,000 positions in the last 2 years. We're on the way to reducing it with laws already passed by 272,000 positions, making it the smallest it's been in more than 30 years. We cut taxes for 15 million working families with 40 million Americans in it, about an average of $1,000 apiece for families of 4 with incomes under $26,000 this year. We made 9 of 10 of our small businesses eligible for tax reductions. We invested in the tools our people need in education and training and technology. We did more to open markets in the last 2 years than in any previous period in a generation. The results are clear. The deficit that 2 years ago was projected to be over $400 billion a year by the end of the decade is now under $200 billion. It's going down for 3 years in a row for the first time since Truman was president. The economic plan we have already passed will cut the deficit in half as a percentage of our economy. We have almost 6 million new jobs, the biggest year in economic growth in 1994 in a decade, with 93% of those jobs in the private sector. That's the largest percentage of private sector job growth in 50 years. We have the lowest combined rate of unemployment and inflation in 25 years. I am proud of this record, and the budget we send today builds on that foundation. In the 3rd year of our strategy, we are adding $81 billion more to deficit reduction. That's nearly $600 billion in real deficit cuts. And in addition to that, of course, there is more, as I said, coming as a result of the economic growth of the last 2 years. This budget provides more than $1 in deficit reduction for every dollar that goes into the tax cuts I will discuss in a moment. If Congress gives me the line item veto, I will find even more cuts. The budget already provides $144 billion in hard budget savings. Behind me, you can see in black and white the 400 programs that this budget will eliminate or consolidate. The terminations of about 130 programs here, and over here, the consolidation of 270 more. Those 271 programs will be distilled down into 27. We are also restructuring 5 major agencies as a part of the second round of Reinventing Government, the Vice President will discuss in a moment, to save $23 billion. And our Reinventing Government effort is looking at all the other agencies for further opportunities that might emerge in the course of the budget debate this year.
One of the ways this has been possible is through reinvention. In the first phase of the National Performance Review, we set out to make government work better and cost less. And this budget reflects continuing progress toward the goals outlined in the first National Performance Review. That work is ongoing. In addition to the federal workforce reductions that the President mentioned a moment ago and that are reflected on the graph behind Bob and Laura there, we are also seeing, and incidentally, we're now on a track to do that even more rapidly, and 102,000 reductions already, another 170,000 already locked in, quite a few more on the way. For example, the 40,000 alone with the privatization or the incorporatization of the air traffic control operations. This budget also reflects significant streamlining in a number of agencies that have cut headquarters and obsolete field offices. For example, the Customs Service is cutting its headquarters by 1/3 and abolishing 7 regional offices. The Agriculture Department is cutting over 1,200 field offices. The Interior Department will cut its headquarters staff by nearly 50% as part of its overall restructuring. And the Labor Department will close many regional and field offices as it streamlines for the 21st century. We've also made changes to make the federal government more results-oriented. More than 100 agencies and departments have set for themselves more than 1,500 customer service standards by which they can be held accountable and with which they pledge what they will each do to serve the public according to measurable standards. Agencies are measuring their results and reporting on their progress. To date, the administration has designated 75 pilots covering more than 400,000 employees. In the future, we will use performance information in the development of budget priorities. The administration is also committed to using technology to make government work better. One quick example, currently 38 states are working to implement electronic benefits transfer, which will help deliver nearly $500 billion in benefits with great savings in monetary terms and also large reductions in the rate of fraud. In the second phase of the National Performance Review, which started in December, we actually announced it back in September, but the formal beginning was in December, we plan to continue our efforts to improve how government works and add a second focus by asking, what should government be doing? The second phase of the Performance Review has 3 elements. It is examining every agency and program with an eye toward whether they should continue to exist, and if they can be privatized or consolidated, or if they can be streamlined significantly so they can provide better service at lower costs. We have some early results, and they are reflected in the budget being unveiled today. For example, this budget proposes to terminate the Interstate Commerce Commission, cancel highway demonstration projects, privatize portions of the National Weather Service, privatize the helium program, rely on the private sector for NASA communication with spacecraft, expand lease authority in our national parks so they're run in a more entrepreneurial way, and privatize the Naval Petroleum Reserve. Several agencies such as HUD, Transportation, and Energy have radically restructured their operations. At HUD, 60 programs have been collapsed into 3 flexible performance-based funds. At the Department of Energy, significant efficiencies have been outlined in the areas of nuclear waste cleanup and management. And at the Department of Transportation, the old rigid structure based on modes of transportation has been replaced by a more modern and efficient organization. Finally, this budget takes a big step in providing more flexibility to state and local governments by consolidating more than 270 programs into 27 performance partnerships that are based on trust and accountability trust in the ability of state and local governments to get the job done without federal micromanagement, and accountability to the federal government for the spending of federal dollars. They will tie federal aid to performance, not to compliance with an administrative process. The largest of these new partnerships will combine 70 job training programs into one system, combine 108 public health and human services programs into 16, and combine 12 specific environmental grants into one. Together, the changes from the second phase of Reinventing Government total over $26 billion, and there is much more on the way. In the next few months, we will continue to improve and streamline and reinvent the federal government. Now, let me say in closing that Reinventing Government is not all about cutting. It's also about making the government we must have work better. Anybody can propose to cut departments or to take a certain percentage out of the government. But as some of our adversaries on Capitol Hill are finding, doing the actual review and separating out what can be cut from what must not be cut is a delicate and difficult business, and I don't think they've put any cuts on the table yet. President Clinton has done just that and will continue to do just that. This budget is a statement of his courage in taking on the tough job of creating a government that works better and costs less. Now, who goes next?
A special word now to those who work for our federal government. Today, the federal workforce is 200,000 employees smaller than it was the day I took office as president. Our federal government today is the smallest it has been in 30 years, and it's getting smaller every day. Most of our fellow Americans probably don't know that. And there's a good reason. A good reason. The remaining federal workforce is composed of hardworking Americans who are now working harder and working smarter than ever before to make sure the quality of our services does not decline. We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We know and we have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington. And we have to give the American people one that lives within its means. The era of big government is over. America has balanced the budget. In fact, as the chart shows, the achievement of the American people will not stop there. OMB predicts that the budget surplus will be $39 billion this year, the largest dollar surplus in our history, the largest surplus as a share of the economy in more than 40 years. America can now turn off the deficit clock and plug in the surplus clock. Given the speed with which our nation has reached this remarkable milestone, it is perhaps all too easy to forget how hard it was and how far we've come. Just 6 years ago, because of the drag of deficits, our people were running in place, our nation was falling behind. Interest rates were high and so was unemployment. On the day I took office, the deficit was projected this year to be $350 billion. How did this greatest projected deficit in history turn into the greatest projected surplus? The old-fashioned way. We earned it. Our nation earned it as a result of hard work by the American people. And as the Vice President said, we earned it here in Washington with the help of two visionary actions in Congress. First, the courageous vote by the Democrats in 1993 in the midst of withering, extreme criticism that led to a cut in the deficit of 90%. And then the truly historic bipartisan balanced budget agreement passed by Congress last year that finished the job.
I think it would also be wrong if I didn't mention, as Mr. Lieu did, that the Reinventing Government efforts headed by the Vice President played a major role. We not only have the smallest government since the Kennedy administration, with more than 300,000 fewer people, we also have savings in excess of $130 billion during the budget period as a result of those efforts. And Mr. Vice President, I am very grateful for what you have done. Now that we're about to have the first surplus since Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, we face a crucial decision about what to do with it. We can use these good times to honor those who've put in a lifetime of work and prepare for the future retirement of the baby boomers by saving the Social Security system for generations to come. Or we can give in to the temptation in this election year to squander our surpluses the moment they start coming in. I think the choice is clear. We got to where we are today with 4.3% unemployment, more than 15 million new jobs, the lowest inflation in over 30 years, low interest rates, high growth, the highest home ownership in history, by doing what was right for the American economy over the long run. That is what we should do now.